Ladies and gentlemen, we live in a world where communication is literally at our fingertips, yet so often, the silence from someone we care about feels deafening. Let's talk about something many of us have experienced: that one person who you know wants to reach out, wants to text you. He's not texting you not because he doesn't care, but because he's scared. And that fear is something he likely won't admit out loud, even to himself. We tend to think of men as emotionally indifferent or unavailable when they don't reach out, but in many cases, the silence isn't a reflection of a lack of emotion, it's the result of an internal battle. While you sit there staring at your phone, wondering why he hasn't sent a message, he could be staring at his too, hesitating with his thumb hovering over your name, typing and deleting the words a dozen times. He wants to text you, he really does, but he can't bring himself to hit send. For many men, expressing vulnerability is deeply uncomfortable. From a young age, they're taught directly or indirectly or then directly that showing emotions or expressing longing is a sign of weakness. Crying? That's for kids. Talking about feelings? That's too much. Being the one to reach out first? That's being soft. These outdated messages get hardwired into their identity, and as they grow older, the idea of emotionally exposing themselves, even something as simple as saying "I miss you" or "I've been thinking about you," feels threatening. It's not about pride in the traditional sense, it's about self-preservation. He doesn't want to risk feeling stupid. He doesn't want to open a door that might not be answered. The thought of being ignored or misunderstood hits a nerve most people won't admit they have. So instead, he waits. He tells himself if she really wants to talk to me, she'll message first. He plays it cool, pretending he doesn't care, not because that's the truth, but because acting detached is the armor he's learned to wear. The worst part, this kind of fear doesn't always look like fear. It looks like silence. It looks like ghosting. It looks like distance. You interpret it as disinterest, but often it's the exact opposite. He's interested enough that it scares him, scared enough that he's paralyzed. And the pressure to appear unaffected makes everything worse. Even if he's confident in other parts of his life, his career, his hobbies, his social life, romantic vulnerability can undo all of that. Because real connection isn't like closing a business deal or winning a game. It requires emotional risk. And if he's been hurt before, or if he's convinced himself that carrying too much makes him weak, then texting you might feel like walking a tightrope. One wrong word and he's falling into uncertainty in his mind. That message might open him up to judgment, confusion, or even rejection, so he says nothing. Silence becomes the safest choice, even if it kills him not to speak. There's also the fear of misreading signals. Maybe he thinks you're not interested. Maybe he's unsure if your last message was genuine or just polite. He replays past interactions in his head, searching for clues, trying to decode your tone, your timing, your emojis. It's exhausting and the stakes feel high, especially if he really likes you. And so he stays quiet, convincing himself that not texting is the better option than reaching out and getting it wrong. The truth is, the silence isn't apathy, it's anxiety, it's uncertainty, it's the overwhelming fear of messing up something that matters. So while it may seem like he's just moved on or doesn't care, don't underestimate the war happening in his mind. Wanting to speak and being afraid to are two completely different things, and he's stuck in between. Fear of vulnerability is a powerful barrier that shapes the way people interact, especially in matters of love and connection. It's not just a passing hesitation or a moment of nervousness, it's a deeply rooted emotional block that can control behavior, distance people from one another, and create confusion where there should be clarity. When someone feels vulnerable, it means they are open, exposed in a way that leaves their emotions, hopes, and insecurities right out in the open. And that kind of emotional nakedness can feel terrifying, especially in a world that often punishes openness with rejection, judgment, or indifference. For many people, vulnerability is linked to past experiences. Maybe they once opened up to someone and were ignored, mocked, or left behind. Maybe they gave their heart to someone who didn't treat it with care. Those wounds don't always heal cleanly. They form scar tissue, and that scar tissue becomes a defense mechanism. It tells the brain, don't do that again. Don't open up. Don't show how much you care. So even when someone deeply wants to connect, that fear of being hurt again creeps in, whispering that silence is safer than expression and emotional distance is better than emotional exposure. When someone is afraid of being vulnerable, they don't always look afraid. Instead, they might seem emotionally detached, distant, or hard to read. They might avoid serious conversations or deflect intimacy with humor or sarcasm. But beneath that surface, there's often a person who is struggling, someone who wants closeness but doesn't know how to risk the possibility of being misunderstood or rejected. The fear becomes a wall, built brick by brick with each disappointing experience, each unanswered message, each time they felt like they weren't enough. And eventually, the wall feels like protection, even though it's actually a prison. Romantic relationships require vulnerability in order to thrive. Without it, everything stays surface level. Real connection, honest, deep connection only comes when two people are willing to be seen for who they truly are. That means admitting you're scared, that you miss someone, that you care more than you let on. But when fear of vulnerability takes over, people hold back those truths, they edit themselves. They choose what feels safe over what feels real, and in doing so, they often sabotage the very thing they want most. This fear isn't just emotional, it's physical. Vulnerability can trigger anxiety, tension, even panic. The body reacts as though it's in danger. The brain lights up with alarm, warning the person to shut down, pull back, stay quiet. It becomes a battle between the heart's desire and the mind's protective instinct, and more often than not, fear wins. The person doesn't say what they mean. They don't send the message. They don't admit they care. And they tell themselves it's better this way, even though it hurts. People often assume that vulnerability makes someone weak, but in truth, it takes incredible strength to be open, to say I'm scared, but I care. To risk hearing no when all you want is yes. It takes courage to speak first, to lean in when you might fall, to love when you don't know if it's safe. Fear of vulnerability convinces people that silence is strength, that indifference is power. But that's a lie. Real power comes from having the bravery to be authentic, to be human, to feel deeply and still choose connection over comfort. So when someone is afraid to be vulnerable, it's not because they don't have anything to say, it's because they're afraid their truth won't be received the way they hope. That fear can silence even the loudest emotions and keep people apart, even when their hearts are trying to come closer. Society glamorizes emotional detachment in ways that are so subtle, so ingrained that most people don't even realize it's happening. From the media we consume to the messages we hear growing up, emotional distance is often portrayed as cool, strong, and desirable. The emotionally unavailable character in movies is often the most mysterious, the most attractive. The one who cares less seems to hold all the power in relationships. We're taught, whether directly or through observation, that the person who wins in love is the one who feels the least, or this mindset starts early. Boys are often told not to cry, to man up, to avoid showing weakness. Girls, though more often allowed to be emotional, still absorb the idea that appearing too needy or too emotional will drive people away. Over time, both men and women learn that if they want to be respected or desired, they need to hold back. The person who texts first, who shows interest too soon, who expresses genuine emotion without reservation is often seen as desperate. Meanwhile, the one who keeps a poker face, delays responses, and never seems too invested becomes the ideal. The logic is clear: protect your heart, don't let them see you care, and you'll come out on top. This emotional detachment becomes a form of armor. People wear it to navigate dating, friendships, even family dynamics. It creates the illusion of control. If you never let anyone get close, you can never be hurt. If you don't care too much, you won't lose too much. But this illusion comes with a cost. Detachment might keep pain at bay for a while, but it also keeps love, connection, and intimacy at a distance. You can't selectively numb your emotions. When you shut down vulnerability to avoid rejection or judgment, you also shut down joy, empathy, and meaningful relationships. Social media only adds fuel to the fire. Curated profiles, carefully timed replies, and a constant stream of highlight reels promote a culture where authenticity takes a backseat to appearances. Vulnerability is edited out. People share confidence, success, and perfection, not confusion, longing, or emotional struggle. The pressure to always seem unbothered becomes exhausting, but it's a game that everyone feels forced to play. If you express too much, you risk being seen as weak. If you express too little, you risk being misunderstood, but somehow the first risk feels more dangerous. Dating apps, too, encourage detachment. With so many options at our fingertips, people become disposable. Ghosting becomes normal. Communication becomes shallow. There's always the idea that someone better, less complicated, or more chill is just one swipe away. So people guard their emotions tightly, afraid that showing too much interest too soon will scare someone off or make them vulnerable in a sea of emotionally distant options. Emotional availability becomes a liability instead of a strength. What's most ironic is that everyone is craving connection, but society conditions them to act like they're not. People want to be seen, understood, and loved, but they're taught to act indifferent. They want honesty and depth, but are afraid that showing it will push others away. So they hold back, play it cool, and mirror each other's emotional distance, creating relationships that feel more like mind games than real human connection. In the end, emotional detachment might be rewarded. In the short term, it can protect egos, preserve pride, and even attract curiosity. But it also creates a culture of loneliness, where people sit on opposite ends of the same silence, both wishing someone would make the first move, both afraid to be the one who breaks the illusion of not caring. Overthinking often silences genuine connection in ways that are hard to notice until it's too late. What begins as a simple question, should I text them, spirals into an endless mental debate filled with assumptions, fears, and imagined scenarios. It's the quiet internal noise that drowns out authenticity. Overthinking turns natural emotion into calculation, and instead of following instinct, people start strategizing every move, worried about how they'll be perceived. This constant mental tug of war creates emotional paralysis, where saying nothing feels safer than saying the wrong thing. When people overthink, they don't just second-guess what they feel, they second-guess how it will be received. A kind message is rewritten 10 times to avoid sounding too eager. A simple compliment is withheld out of fear it might seem weird or too much. Someone hesitates to ask a question, fearing they'll come across as insecure or intrusive. These are all small moments, but each one chips away at the opportunity to create a real, honest connection. Instead of speaking from the heart, people start speaking from fear. The mind tries to protect the heart by preparing for rejection before it even happens. This leads to made-up narratives. They probably don't want to hear from me. If they cared, they'd reach out first, or they're probably talking to someone else. None of these thoughts are based on truth. They're based on fear dressed up as logic. But over time, those imagined outcomes start to feel more real than the relationship itself. So instead of texting, instead of calling, instead of showing up honestly, the person pulls away not because they don't care, but because they're afraid to be wrong. Overthinking also creates emotional distance because it puts connection under a microscope. Every word is analyzed, every pause is scrutinized. Did they take too long to reply? Did they use a period instead of an emoji? Why did they say LOL instead of haha? These questions build up and add unnecessary weight to simple conversations. It stops people from enjoying the moment because they're too busy interpreting every detail through the lens of anxiety. This hyper-awareness can become exhausting not just for the person overthinking, but for the person on the other end who may feel like they're constantly being evaluated instead of accepted. In many cases, overthinking comes from a desire to do things right. People want to be loved, respected, and understood, and they think if they can just get it right, they'll avoid pain. But connection isn't about perfection, it's about presence. It's about being real, being flawed, and letting someone see you as you are. Overthinking, however, tries to filter and control that experience. It tells people they can't be too much or too little. They can't be too fast or too slow. It becomes a tightrope walk instead of a shared experience. When people are trapped in their heads, they're not really in the relationship, they're in a conversation with themselves about the relationship. This prevents them from being fully present with the other person. They may respond late half-heartedly, or not at all, not because they're uninterested, but because they're overwhelmed by imaginary consequences. In trying to protect themselves, they end up sabotaging something that could have been real. Genuine connection thrives on honesty, spontaneity, and emotional openness, but overthinking replaces all of that with hesitation. And in the silence that follows when messages aren't sent, feelings aren't shared, and chances aren't taken, opportunities for real closeness quietly slip away. Overthinking convinces people to play it safe, but in doing so, it often ensures they miss out on the very thing they're hoping to protect, meaningful connection. The silence isn't strength, it's fear in disguise. It's easy to mistake quiet for control, emotional distance for maturity, or detachment for confidence, especially in a world that praises people who appear unbothered. But more often than not, silence is not a reflection of composure or self-assurance. It's a defense mechanism, a carefully crafted mask worn by someone who is afraid to be seen too clearly or feel too deeply. Behind the calm exterior is a storm of uncertainty, hesitation, and the desperate need to protect oneself from rejection or emotional risk. When someone chooses silence, especially in moments when communication is needed, it's rarely because they've risen above emotion, it's because they are overwhelmed by it. The fear of saying the wrong thing, of being misunderstood, of opening themselves up to pain often convinces people that saying nothing at all is safer. That fear doesn't look like panic on the outside, it looks like unread messages, missed calls, and awkward pauses. But beneath the surface, it's fear working hard to keep the person protected from what they assume will hurt the most: vulnerability. Many people have been conditioned to believe that showing emotion is a weakness. Especially in romantic contexts, there's a prevailing belief that whoever cares less has more power. So when feelings arise, feelings of longing, missing someone, wanting clarity or closeness, they are swallowed instead of expressed. Silence becomes a tactic, a way to maintain the illusion of being unaffected. The person on the other end may interpret this as strength, as someone who's moved on or doesn't care, but in reality, the silence is a sign of someone who cares so much they're terrified of the outcome if they show it. This fear-driven silence is exhausting. It creates a constant internal struggle between what someone feels and what they allow themselves to express. The mind tells them to stay quiet, to keep the upper hand, to avoid looking desperate. The heart, however, wants to reach out, to connect, to speak honestly. That tug of war is draining and often leads to regret. Missed opportunities, unspoken words, unresolved feelings all become the cost of choosing fear over courage. Silence also sends mixed signals. While it may feel like self-protection to the one holding back, it often comes across as indifference to the person on the receiving end. This creates a painful disconnect where both people may care deeply, but neither is willing to be the first to break the silence. Each one is waiting for the other to be brave enough to speak. In the end, that silence grows heavier, not stronger. What was meant to guard emotions ends up stifling them. The truth is, it takes more strength to speak up than it does to stay quiet. It takes courage to say, I miss you, or I'm scared, or I care. Silence might feel like control, but it's really avoidance. It's fear dressed up in stoicism. Real strength lies in vulnerability, in the ability to face uncomfortable emotions and still choose connection over isolation. Many people don't realize they're operating from fear. They call it self-respect, pride, or even independence. But if silence is coming from a place of anxiety, uncertainty, or emotional self-defense, then it isn't true strength, it's a coping mechanism. And while that silence might feel like protection, it often does more harm than good. It builds walls where there should be bridges. It creates space where there should be understanding. It's fear wearing a brave face, and in the end, it only deepens the distance between hearts that want to meet. Your worth isn't defined by someone else's hesitation. Yet when someone pulls away, doesn't reply, or can't make up their mind about you, it's easy to internalize that behavior to Musul. You begin to question yourself, what did I do wrong? Was I not enough? Should I have said less or maybe more? It's a natural reaction, especially when you've opened yourself up to someone emotionally. But the truth is, their uncertainty is not about you. It's about them, their fears, their readiness, their internal conflicts, and it does not diminish your value no matter how personal it feels. We often tie our self-worth to how others treat us, especially in romantic or emotionally charged relationships. When someone hesitates, delays, or withholds affection or clarity, it creates a painful silence that begs to be filled with explanation. In the absence of answers, we start to make up our own, and most of the time, those imagined explanations point the finger inward. Maybe if you had been prettier, quieter, smarter, more interesting, they wouldn't be hesitating. But this line of thinking is not only false, it's damaging. Someone else's emotional confusion is not a mirror. It's not proof that you lack anything. It's a projection of where they are in their own emotional journey, not an accurate measurement of your desirability, your beauty, or your capacity to be loved. Hesitation can stem from fear, emotional unavailability, or unresolved trauma. It can also come from immaturity, mixed priorities, or simply not being ready for the kind of depth you're offering. None of that is your responsibility to fix or carry. You can show up fully, honestly, and wholeheartedly, and still someone else might not be able to meet you there. That doesn't make your offering any less valuable. It just means they weren't capable or willing to receive it. You deserve someone who chooses you without pause, who isn't calculating how much they should care or how often they should reach out. Someone who values clarity over games, who sees your presence as a gift, not as a burden to weigh or a question to sit on indefinitely. When someone hesitates to show up for you, it's not your job to chase their certainty. It's your job to stand firm in your own. Hesitation from others can be incredibly loud in your mind, especially when it comes from someone you care about. It lingers in the form of silence, mixed signals, and inconsistent attention. And while it's human to want closure or understanding, it's also important to remember that closure doesn't always come from someone else. Sometimes you give it to yourself by saying, their inability to choose me has nothing to do with my worth. Your value is not negotiable. It's not conditional on whether someone texts back, chooses to commit, or even sees your value right away. You were worthy before they showed up in your life, and you'll still be worthy after they leave or fail to meet you halfway. Your worth comes from how you love, how you care, how you show up for yourself and others, not from how someone else responds to that love. You don't need to dim your light just because someone else doesn't recognize its glow. So when someone hesitates, whether out of fear, confusion, or immaturity, remember that their pause is not your problem to solve. You are not an audition, you are not a maybe. You are not a question mark waiting to be answered. You are a whole person, complete and deserving of certainty. And if someone can't see that, it says more about their readiness than it ever could about your worth.